Hello, I'm Wayne from Talk Cars. We're going to have a little chat about dangerous modifications. We've seen quite a few really badly modified cars over the years, so we're going to compile the common pitfalls into this video so you can avoid making those mistakes that we've seen. I set up Talk Cars to document my experience with modifying cars, and over the years I've seen quite a few really badly modified cars or positively dangerous modifications, so we're going to discuss some of these so everyone out there can avoid making the same mistakes. It really is essential that you make sure that all the mods you do to your car are done correctly and safely. And most of the problems we actually see fall into three areas: cutting corners with cheap parts, fitting inappropriate parts, and poor installation of parts. So let's look at those areas and see what corners are being cut and how we can avoid them. The old mantra buy cheap, buy twice is certainly true when it comes to modifying cars. We see that often you get parts that are reconditioned, and all the manufacturers seem to think reconditioning requires is cleaning it up. It's quite common with reconditioned turbochargers to just get a shiny turbo unit where none of the internal bearings or components have actually been renewed and it's just had all of the carbon cleaned off. You fit that to your car and it'll be fine for a few miles, and then it'll catastrophically fail. So that's a classic example of buying a cheap part but having to go out and buy it again because it's failed prematurely. The actual construction and parts that are used in a lot of modifications are actually substandard. We see a lot of cheap parts are just inferior and they break under the slightest amount of stress. We've noticed a lot of parts are labelled for motorsport use only, so the manufacturers can get around having them pass safety tests and be approved for road use. So be very careful if a part you buy doesn't show a safety mark. So anything that involves the braking, the suspension or the steering are significant areas of the car, and you really shouldn't cut any corners when modifying these. There's also parts designed for lower spec cars and they're often cheaper. The classic example is cheaper tyres. You get tyres with a speed rating on them, and a lot of people seem to assume that the speed rating only applies to the maximum speed you drive the car at, and they ask, why should I buy tyres rated for 150 miles an hour when I never go at those speeds? In reality though, the speed rating shows the load and stress that the torque from the engine puts on the tyres. So if you've got a very fast performance car, even if you're not driving at 150 miles an hour, your tyre still experiences much greater stresses and shear forces than it would on a much lower powered car. So it's essential that you at least match or exceed the speed rating recommendations from your manufacturer, especially if you've modified the car. And if you've made extensive modifications, it makes a lot of sense to choose a performance part that can really allow you to make the most of your mods and do it safely. The last thing you want is a tyre blowing out on heavy cornering or under heavy braking. The next area is fitting inappropriate motorsport parts on a daily car. There's a lot of high performance parts out there that work really well on cars used in motorsports and competition on tracks at high RPMs. But when you use those same parts under everyday road conditions, it can actually degrade the performance and handling of the car significantly enough to present a danger to yourself and other road users around you. One example that we see quite a lot is of brake pads. Race spec brake pads are designed to operate in a very high temperature range. On the road, they don't meet those high temperatures, so they're often outside of their optimum biting range. The end result is that your braking distance is dramatically reduced. So you should select brake pads and other components that match the usage that your car is going to experience. Thankfully, there's an awful lot of parts out there to choose from, lots of good quality road spec parts that exceed the manufacturer's specifications. If you're going on a track day, You need to ditch those road spec parts and upgrade to higher performance parts, particularly brake pads. We really do recommend you get an oil change to a good quality oil if you go on a track day, and also change your brake pads. You'll find that the life of these items is significantly reduced on a track day because you're really pushing it to the limits. Now, the final area we're going to look at is poor installation of performance parts. There's obvious issues like body modifications that just haven't been securely fitted. We've seen rear wings that are just flapping about because they've not been correctly fitted to the back of the car. Other body parts can shear off with just the vibrations of daily use of the car. You really need to make sure that all of these parts are correctly fitted. The other really common one that we see a lot is dropping the car's suspension really low, fitting really hard springs, and that adversely affects the handling of the car. It may be fine on a perfectly smooth track surface, but when you're using it on a road with potholes and bumps and different cambers and undulations, it can dramatically reduce grip as it skips over those bumps and imperfections in the road surface. We've also seen installations of suspension which cause the tyres to rub against the bodywork. Now, that is just a matter of time before those tyres will blow out. Another factor to take into account with poorly fitting parts is cutting corners. Often mechanics and owners want to save time, or they don't have the appropriate tools. We've often seen people put pipes and cables through the bulkhead, and all they've done is drill a hole in the bulkhead which exposes sharp metal. And with all the vibrations going on, it is just a matter of time before those cables or pipes are cut through and you've got some serious problems. We also see wires and pipes flapping around in the engine bay, rubbing on other components. That's often down to just not taking the time to ensure that these parts are securely mounted with appropriate clips and cable ties. If you've had someone else work on your car, it's a really good idea to just check their work. Don't assume that they've done it to a high standard. So how do we avoid making these mistakes? Well, knowledge is the key. The more information we take in, the more articles we read, the more people we consult, the less likely we will be to make a common mistake. When you buy a part, ask yourself, is this too good to be true? Is there a reason why this part is so cheap? Look at reviews of the supplier, the manufacturer, at people who've got your model of car and how they've got on with that specific mod. It's really the only way of making sure that a part you buy is going to be good. If you just rely on the advertising material and what's written on the box, you're going to make the same mistakes that I and many others have made in the past and end up with a part that's just not going to perform very well and not going to be very good for your car. So thanks for watching. We hope this has been informative to you. Be sure to drop by our site, say hi to us in our forums. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. We've got lots of other money saving tips coming up.